Okay, let's start off with week one. And the first example is A diminished seventh. We're going to be working through various arpeggio fingerings, starting with different fingers of the fretting hand. Here we go. Well, let's try this with a metronome, and we'll have this set at quarter note equals 100. Here's the first pattern, starting with the index finger. 1, 2, ready, and. Same pattern now starting, or similar pattern now starting with the third finger. 1, 2, 3, and. And finally, an A diminished seventh arpeggio starting with the pinky or the fourth finger. 1, 2, ready, and. Okay, now we're going to move on to a D diminished seventh arpeggio. This will be our form that we'll use with the root of the diminished seventh arpeggio on the fifth string or the A string. Here's a D diminished seventh chord. And you'll notice the repeating shapes in the pattern. And again, we're going to start with the index finger this time. So here is D diminished seventh arpeggio with the first finger starting the pattern. 1, 2, ready, and. D diminished seventh starting with the third finger. 2, 3, 4. And finally, we're going to use another root 6 pattern, meaning the root of the arpeggio will be on the low 6th string, the low E string. And we're going to use a symmetrical pattern that utilizes the first and fourth fingers of the fretting hand. And this is a really popular pattern to really get across the fretboard and access 3 octaves. We're going to do this with the A diminished seventh arpeggio. Here we go with a quarter note at 100. 1, 2, ready, and. And it'll be the exact same pattern coming down, all in minor thirds. Okay, in week 2 we're going to explore some different patterns. A lot of these patterns are symmetrical just due to the inherent nature of the diminished seventh chord. So we're going to start off, the first 4 bars will be in 3/4 time, and it just utilizes different shapes to get across the fretboard. So we're going to stick with our tonal center of A diminished seventh, which of course you can also think of an F sharp diminished seventh, or an E flat diminished seventh, or a C diminished seventh. They're all the same, they're symmetrical. Okay, so here we go with the first 4 measures of week 2. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, and. And you can see I'm using the exact same fingering for all of those shapes. Now let's add a little bit of a rhythmic variety. We're still staying in A diminished seventh, but we're going to start with a note E flat on the D string for the next 4 bars, and we're just going to mix it up a little bit with some different rhythms and different permutations in the pattern. So here are the next 4 bars of week 2. 1, 2, 3. Same thing. 1, 2, 3. And by adding different rhythms and just different permutations in the pattern, that will prevent your lines from sounding stale, because you just don't want to. Some players who are already familiar with diminished seventh patterns sometimes feel like they get stuck in a rut by just only doing shapes. So, and so forth. So by mixing up the different intervallic patterns and rhythms, then your lines will start to sound more musical. Okay, so the last part of week 2's example here is just another little workout. We're back in 4/4 time, and it just mixes up the intervals to give a really nice string skipping workout and also a nice workout for the fretting hand. So here we go, the final 4 bars of week 2. 1, 2, 3, and. Okay, for week 3, we're going to explore the diminished scale. The diminished scale, which pairs with the diminished seventh chord, is sometimes known as a whole half scale, meaning the scale is built in successive whole and half steps. So it's an octatonic scale, meaning there's 8 notes in the scale, and it's repeating. It's just a constant repetition of whole notes, whole steps rather, and half steps. So it is known as the whole half scale, but let's just call it the diminished scale because it works well with the diminished 7th chords. Take a look at the fingerings for the examples. There's lots of different ways that you can finger this. For example, there's different patterns that you can get into where you'll have this kind of movement, where the fingerings are repeating. So there's different ways. If you have 4 notes on a string, there's different ways to finger that, and I just suggest trying all of them out to see which ones work for you. But some examples are the fingering given in the notation. For example, we use simple 1, 2, 3, 4 fingering for the 4 notes, such as this. But you may also decide to use a shift in one of your fingers. So for example, you could also finger that same passage 1, 1, 3, 4, 1, 1, 3, 4. Or you could go 1, 2, 4, 4 and use a shift there. And you may decide on different patterns for ascending versus descending passages as well. So let's work through the different examples of the A diminished scale for week 3. Here are the first 3 measures. I'll just do it without the metronome, but we'll still do it in time. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and. Okay, here's the next example. Now starting with the pinky of the fretting hand. Same scale, and you'll notice a lot of the same repeating patterns with the fingerings. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're going to explore the dominant diminished scale, which is also known as a half-whole scale. And this is the same diminished scale, but this one is used over dominant chords. And what it is a diminished scale or a whole half scale up a half step. So it works over dominant 7th chords that have a flat 9 in them. So in this case, we're going to be using an A7 flat 9. For that, if you want to think of it as a diminished scale, meaning a whole half scale, we'll be using a B flat diminished scale. But over A, if you want to think of the root of the scale as an A, it'll be an A half whole or an A dominant diminished scale. So here it is. Fingering starting with the index finger of the fretting hand. 2, 3, 4. And this scale works well with sharp 9 chords, flat 9 chords, 13 sharp 9 or flat 9, or also sharp 11 chords, or sharp 11 and 13 chords. If you were to analyze the notes in the scale, you would actually have a natural 5th plus a sharp 11, a 13, as well as a flat 9 and a sharp 9. So it's not quite an altered scale, it's a different sound. Okay, now let's explore the next 3 bars. This one uses a symmetrical pattern that works really nicely of 4 notes per string, and we're going to work right up through the 3 octaves of A. So this again will work with an A7 flat 9 or a 13 chord. And here's the pattern. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and.